It's a peaceful oasis. You got it, you got it. This was a Pizza Hut. Now it's all covered with daisies. You got it, you got it. I miss the honky tonks, Dairy Queens, and 7-Elevens. You got it, you got it. And as things fell apart, nobody paid much attention. You got it, you got it.
All right, welcome everyone. I feel like me talking is definitely not as fun sounding as the talking heads, but it's time for us to get started. So unfortunately, we can't listen to the talking heads for the rest of the webinar. Thank you so much for joining everyone, and welcome to How to Host a Youth Climate Summit virtual event. And we're here today to talk about this incredible network of youth climate summits organized through the Wild Center's Youth Climate Program and the resources that are available to help you plan and organize your very own event, either virtually or in person. And we just so appreciate everyone being here today. We know that signing up for more Zoom at this stage in the game is not a small thing. So we just are really grateful to everyone that's here, and we hope that we can make this whole hour be completely worth your time. So my name is Erin Griffin, and I'm the Wild Center's Youth Climate Program Manager. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm calling from Saranac Lake, New York, which is occupied Haudenosaunee land.
Hi, everybody. My name is Hannah Katz. I also use she, her pronouns, and I am the current Climate Communications Fellow for the Youth Climate Program. Today, I'm calling from Clinton, New York, which is also on occupied Haudenosaunee land.
And then I'd like to pass it over to Elise Trelligan to have her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elise Trelligan. I use she, her pronouns. I work for the NOAA Chesapeake Bay office during my day job, and I coordinate something called the Youth Environmental Action Summit in Maryland, kind of in my out of work time. And I'm calling in from Salisbury, Maryland, where I live and work on Nanticoke land.
Thanks so much, Elise. We're so glad you're here. And then I'd like to pass it over to Erin Kluge to introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Erin Kluge. I use she, her pronouns. I'm currently calling in from Geneva, New York, which I believe is Onondaga territory. I am the student intern and organizer for the Finger Lakes Youth Climate Summit virtual series, and I'm super excited to be here.
Thank you so much. So before we just really get rolling, just a couple Zoom things. Please feel free to use the chat at any point, just to connect with any other attendees on the call. And we also have the Q&A function at the bottom. So we will be pausing for questions multiple times throughout the presentation and keeping a close eye on that. So please feel free if you have questions for us. That's what we're here for. We're excited to hear them. So just drop those questions in the Q&A function at any time, and feel free to introduce yourself and say hi and say where you're coming from too. So today's plan, we're gonna just get to know who's on the call and see who's here and get to know each other a little bit better. And then Hannah and I are going to just do kind of like a summit, Youth Climate Summit nuts and bolts about the just basics and foundations of youth climate summits. We'll hear from our guest speakers during that time, and we'll have lots of questions at the end. And I just want to mention too that we will be talking about in-person and virtual summits today. And of course, one of those might be more appropriate than the other, depending on where you are and what the pandemic is like where you are. So just know that both those options are available. And of course, we don't want anyone to host an in-person summit until it's safe to do so, even though we are all very excited for in-person summits again. So next, just to get to know everyone a little bit better, we're going to use a tool called Mentimeter. So if you could you can use a browser on your phone, or you can use a browser on whatever device you're calling in from, and head over to menti.com. And once you get there, you'll be prompted to put in a code, which is 63487700. And that should take you to this screen. So hopefully everyone found it. And we just love to hear where everyone is joining from today. That's kind of a cool thing about virtual programs, is that folks are coming from all over the place. So we have some folks from different parts of New York, Nebraska, Louisiana. Awesome. No summits in Nebraska or Louisiana yet, so that would be exciting. Maryland, Traverse City, another New York State, Homer, Alaska, super exciting. Canada, New Hampshire, Florida. Awesome. You got folks from all over the place. Fantastic. A couple Canadians. Welcome. This is really exciting. All right. Thanks for sharing, everyone. So the next question that should pop up is, what best describes you? Another cool thing about Youth Climate Summits is that they really can be hosted by anyone. So we just want to get a sense of who's here today. So we got some nonprofit folks, college students, some teachers and educators. Shout out to all teachers and educators right now for almost making it through a heck of a year. Community member. Awesome. All right, thank you for sharing. Looks like we got mostly teachers, educators, and nonprofit folks with us today. Awesome, and our last question for today is, what are you hoping to learn today? And we wanted to ask this at the beginning so we can make sure that we can highlight and bring up the things that are most important for you to hear about in regards to Youth Climate Summits. And maybe you're just learning about it for the first time, and that's totally great too. Online summit facilitation, setting goals, do's and don'ts, resources to host this type of event, getting a summit off the ground for the first time, super exciting. Learning from different experiences, engaging with an online summit, logistics. This is great because I think I'm like doing a mental checklist in my head, and I'm pretty sure most of these things are included in our presentation, which is exciting. Lots of virtual ones, so folks are still thinking virtual summits. Wow, this is great. Engaging underserved communities, involving fifth graders, attracting youth from urban areas. Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing, everyone. We're really glad you're here, and we're going to do our best to touch on as many of those things as we can as we move through the presentation.
Yeah, it's really great to see where everyone's coming from, and I guess the diversity of goals and people that we have here today with us. Thank you again for being here. So like we've mentioned earlier, we are from the Wild Center, which is located in the Adirondack Park in Tupper Lake, New York. You can see it on the map. And the Wild Center is an interactive mashup of a science museum, a nature center, an aquarium, and the zoo. And we'll be opening for the summer season next week if anyone wants to pop by and come see us in person. So besides being a really cool museum, the Wild Center hosts the Youth Climate Program. And the Youth Climate Program works globally to convene and empower young people to implement climate action plans in their schools and communities. So while we do a lot of variety of programs, including youth leadership, training, and teacher professional development, the heart of the Youth Climate Program is our Youth Climate Summit. So summits are high energy, youth-driven conference style events to educate students about climate science, impacts, and solutions, and empower them to complete climate action plans. We at the Wild Center have been hosting Youth Climate Summits for now 12 years, and last fall we hosted a virtual adaptation of the Youth Climate Summit called Youth Have Power. As we start going over the essentials for planning Youth Climate Summit, you'll see that everything is totally able to be creatively adapted to host different organizations, sites, and situations, which also means completely virtual. So youth voice is the absolute foundation of Youth Climate Summits and everything we do at the Youth Climate Program. So we're going to turn it over to Erin Kluge to share her perspective with us on why Youth Climate Summits are important. So Erin is a student at Hobart and William Smith's colleges and has been involved with both the Western New York and the Finger Lakes Youth Climate Summit, which are both in New York State. So.
Hi again, thank you, Hannah. So I am a sophomore at the Hobart William Smith Colleges. So I've seen both perspectives from being a student attending climate summits. Actually, the picture in the slide beforehand, that was me and a couple of my colleagues sitting front row, ready to learn. And now in college, I worked as the intern to plan a summit. So like I said, I've seen kind of both sides of it. I got into climate activism and climate summit work my junior year of high school. And because of the experience that I was able to have with my peers, we've had several success projects, such as implementing a climate resolution at my village school district board, as well as being able to earn grant money for more recycling into my high school. And that was thank you to the Wild Center. Here, I was able to work as the student intern and organizer for the Finger Lakes Youth Climate Summit, and it was virtual this year, but we still saw a lot of success. The theme that I chose was advocacy in the digital realm because of, as we all know, like this is virtual, so I figured that trying to help high schoolers be able to advocate for what they're passionate about, even though there are some limitations with Zoom, there are plenty of other ways to get involved and stay active. Hannah was a part of our summit and she helped lead a workshop about creating social media posts to start campaigns to help summit attendees. And because of that, several schools were able to implement action projects with using Canva art to put posters around their schools to get people in the know of different climate work, as well as starting just a social media campaign, which is super exciting. I found, like I said earlier, climate summits are super important because not only does it get people involved, even if it is virtual, there is still success and helps bring a lot of hope and solidarity to students as young as freshmen or middle school age of high school, all the way up to their senior year of high school, so they can continue these projects as they enter college or the workforce or wherever else that they do. I'm really grateful to have been able to attend summits for 2 years as well as run one. I've learned a lot from it, and I feel as though even though it is virtual, it can be hard to keep up engagement at times. There are still plenty of opportunities for students as long as we are able to support one another, and there are great communities and networks that I've learned through other climate summit members and organizers. It's a great community. It's a great way for students to get involved. And I'm just super grateful I was able to have that experience.
Thank you so much, Erin. It's great to hear your perspective and your experience. And Erin is around, the rest of the webinar today. So feel free to send her questions in the chat or the Q&A, and she'll be around for when we stop for questions later too. So another just incredible part of this work is it's happening all over the world. So since we hosted the first Adirondack Youth Climate Summit in 2009, summits have been there's been over 45 locations around the world that have hosted a youth climate summit. And that's everywhere from Finland to Nashville, Tennessee, to Sri Lanka, to Seattle, Washington, and many more locations, and they've been hosted by high school students, by zoos, aquariums, parents, community members, really anyone who's interested in getting involved with climate education and climate action. So this is just a screenshot of an interactive map on our website where you can check out all these different summit locations, see if there's one near you, see the organizations and the youth and teachers that are helping make it happen, just to get a sense of that network that exists out there. And as we go through the presentation today, we're going to be referencing back to these resources that are all available for free online. So that's everything from our Youth Climate Summit Toolkit, which is kind of the foundational Youth Climate Summit 101. The supplemental resources has a bunch of like plug and play tools that you can use when you're planning your summit. The Partner Summit Media Kit has a bunch of communication and social media and like outreach tools you can use. There's a Climate Action Planning Facilitator Guide. We also have monthly Youth Climate Summit Network meetings that are open to anyone interested in summits. You all are invited. I'll have more on that later. And then a virtual toolkit for virtual adaptation of summits. So there is a ton there to explore. So just know that everything we talk about today, you can find more and explore on your own time at all these resources on our website. So we're finally going to kind of dive into the details of what makes summits unique and powerful and how you can plan these in your community. So most importantly, all these summits are different and unique, and we're going to touch on the core values and elements to planning a summit, but we expect that you'll adapt these to make it work the best for you and your community with what you're working with. And that also goes for adapting it to in-person or virtual summits. So the most foundational elements are these 6 values that we really make sure show up in all the programming that we do. And those are place-based, action-oriented, solutions-focused, youth-driven, hopeful, and equitable. And we really, everything that we plan, we look back on these values and make sure that they're showing up in the programming that's happening. And you'll see those icons next to each one of those 6 values. Look out for those throughout the presentation and throughout our Youth Climate Summit Toolkit. And those will kind of show you how those values actually show up in the event and in the programming.
So Youth Climate Summits are a lot of fun. They're also a lot of work, and nobody should have to plan a Youth Climate Summit alone. So building a steering committee from local stakeholders like students, teachers, and community partners help to ensure that your summit is meeting the needs and utilizing the assets of your local community. Youth voice is critical on this committee. Both the presence of youth voice and ensuring that adults are treating youth as equal partners in the planning process is very important for our Youth Climate Summits. And many summits are even exclusively planned by youth. So once you have established a steering committee, they can help you to determine the overall scope and structure of your event, including the target audience, what age do you want to target, what geographic area, the scope of your summit, is it going to be one day or multi-day, the venue it'll take place at, the date to make sure that there are no conflicts with school schedules, planning, and the timeline. This committee is essential to these decisions to provide varied perspectives and ensure there aren't any other factors that would make it difficult for participants to actually attend. Input from students and teachers is really important in this committee. So once you have your foundational elements worked out, it's time to start planning the logistics of your summit. It's important to start with your audience. And now that you and your steering committee have decided who you want to serve with your summit, focusing on specific schools and geographic regions are really important. So most summits are for high school students, but college and middle school summits are also great and have been held successfully. So this time in your planning process is all about relationship building. So you want to build relationships with administrators, teachers, and most importantly, the students themselves. Are there any existing relationships that you have between you and your organization and a school, a teacher, or student networks that might be interested in the summit? How can students influence decisions? How can they be encouraged to take interest and excitement in the summit. And so these are all questions that you should be considering during this process. And whenever possible, use youth peers to send messages to other students. Think creatively. The Nashville Youth Climate Summit students used recruitment for their summit through Instagram and DMing all their friends to make sure that they got to the audience.
So once you have a sense of who your audience is and who you're targeting, you can move on to thinking about the agenda. So a typical summit includes both plenary sessions where everyone will gather to hear a speaker, and then breakout workshops. So most summit starts with a plenary session on climate science and impacts that's really specific to the place where the summit's being held. So here in the Adirondacks, that would look much more like talking about decreasing winters and changes to our local environment instead of maybe hearing about, polar bears in the Arctic or something like that. And we also make sure in that opening presentation that there's opportunities to learn about climate justice and equity issues and how those intersect with the science of climate change as well. And after that, students will move into solutions-focused breakout workshops. And really the biggest takeaway with those workshops is to aim for variety and diversity. And providing a variety of topics will make sure that every student who attends can find at least one entry point into climate action that speaks to them. And then when you provide many workshops happening at the same time, the students can split up, they can go attend different workshops and then come back to their friends from their school and share their ideas and use that to start brainstorming their climate action plan. So just some themes and topics that we see really commonly show up at summits are, you can see the whole list here, and it's important to balance kind of that critical content learning. So things like maybe waste management or local food or those really specific solutions that are happening in your area, and balancing that content with skill building. So things like effective communication or project management or running an environmental club. And really that mix of content and skills that's going to be the foundation for climate action plans that the students end up working on later. And again, this is a big place to highlight climate justice and equity issues as well. And we use resources frequently from the Alliance for Climate Education. They have some great resources for running a whole variety of different workshops and programming having to do with climate justice. And the other topic we see a lot is civic engagement. And specifically, civic engagement is something that's been more accessible to students during the pandemic. So that's been a pretty frequent topic at virtual summits. So also, you're going to be thinking about specific speakers for the workshops, and frequently speakers with a long list of credentials are not necessarily the best speakers to reach youth. So speakers that are prioritizing hands-on activities and discussion and relating to the experience of being a high schooler as best they can, those are the speakers that will really reach youth more effectively. So thinking with that in mind, it's really important to set clear expectation for speakers on how to present to a high school audience and how that's different from presenting to adults. So we have a speaker expectation template in our supplemental resources that provides some sample language to give to speakers around presenting to youth. Additionally, think of the audience of your summit and just make sure that students are able to learn from speakers that both reflect their own life experiences, but also expose them to new and different life experiences that they might not encounter in their day-to-day lives. And this is an important way, again, to highlight justice and equity issues. And frequently when we're looking for a keynote speaker, and really all of our speakers in general, we are prioritizing women and Black, Indigenous, people of color speakers for almost all of our programming. So it's just something to think about when you're thinking about the diversity of voices that you're featuring at your summit.
All right, so now we're going to move away from the nuts and bolts, and we're going to talk about some other characteristics that make summits unique and powerful learning experiences. So, of course, one of the most important things, it wouldn't be a youth climate summit without youth engagement and leadership throughout the entire process of planning and implementing a summit. In addition to gathering their ideas for the summit, it's also important to engage youth in the actual planning and the organizing and running of these events themselves. You can assemble a team of local high schoolers. We have one and we call them the Summiteers. And they can help plan the summit introduction and the grand finale, run social media campaigns, art installations, presentations, and more. For our Summiteer team, we use a skills self-assessment quiz that we have all the students fill out to break them into planning groups. And this form is available in the supplemental resources on our website. You can best support youth to take on these kinds of roles by making it easy for them to be part of a team. So when you're trying to schedule meetings, consider timing in terms of school and other things the students might have going on, how they're going to travel to be where your meeting is, and having food for your meetings. High school students love having food meetings. And be sure that there's enough structure and leadership in place so they know their roles, expectations, and deadlines. So for adults, this is a really great time to practice true allyship with youth, which often involves giving up and sharing some of the power that we're used to having as adults.
So also summits, they have to be fun. Like everyone's just going to have a better time and learn more and connect with more people when they're having fun. And this is just honestly another great way to build community and energy and connections in the midst of, what is otherwise a pretty overwhelming crisis. And we didn't really want to go into this too much because this is just an area where the youth leaders that you're working with will hands down have the best ideas. They'll just have the best ideas. There's no other way to say it. So some things we've done at our summit before are have, interactive art installations, social media scavenger hunts. We've had a sustainability themed photo booth and a graffiti wall. Last year we got a life-size cutout of Bill Nye, and he was like our mascot throughout the summit. But all those ideas came from students. So I would just encourage you really to get your students brainstorming and to listen to their ideas, and they'll have the best ideas on how to make things fun at the summit. Additionally, thinking about the sustainability of your summit is key. It's a way for students to experience sustainability and climate solutions in action. You also want to avoid those awkward moments of students going to a workshop about how bad single-use plastics is and then having to use some of those things at lunch. So we just encourage you to think about that as you're planning, and just to avoid, any of those contradictions in kind of walking the talk. So some ways to kind of avoid that are just thinking zero waste. And if you're working with like a caterer or someone who's providing the food, thinking about avoiding those single-use plastics items. See if you can enlist some of your youth leaders to help with things like recycling or composting or energy reduction, really anything like that. And then just rethinking what swag is really essential. Like we know students love swag, but we also know that it's something that might end up in the landfill at some point. So just thinking about what swag is absolutely necessary and how you can make that sustainable as possible.
So last but certainly not least is the climate action plan. And the climate action planning section is the most foundational element of the summit. By incorporating climate action planning, young people have the chance to decide for themselves how they want to take climate action in their own lives, in their schools, and in their communities. Ending the summit with youth generating their own climate action plan helps students feel empowered and excited to start making change. So a few tips on climate action planning. First, don't forget our free climate action planning facilitator guide, which includes lessons plans, template slide decks, and a climate action plan worksheet that you can adapt to meet the needs of your site. So be sure to allocate a minimum of 45 minutes for these climate action planning sessions for students to work in teams. The team approach is really important here. That's why we always encourage students to sign up for summits in teams whenever possible. After the planning session, you can have one student from each team present an elevator pitch of the project, the entire summit audience, and the collective power of hearing all of these plans will leave everyone feeling inspired and energized for the summit. So one of the other important things is following up and supporting students in their climate action plans after the summit. And that's a key way to make sure that these plans come to fruition and turn into actions. So we at the Wild Center offer a small mini grant program to student teams, which is one of the main ways that we keep in touch with students after the summit. So successful climate action plans are one of the most exciting outcomes of the summits, and we just wanted to share a couple of successful climate action plans with all of you so you can see what they look like. Often, first-time climate action plans will focus on changes that students can see in their communities and issues that they're dealing with regularly. So implementing better recycling practices like these students did here, or eliminating plastic silverware in their cafeterias, or installing things like refillable water bottle stations like you see here, or solar phone charging stations. And it's important to remember as well that climate action plans have still been happening throughout the whole pandemic. And something we've experienced is that schools who come to summits multiple times and form strong green teams can extend the vision beyond their school into their community. And this is a student in Saranac Lake who helped the village government achieve certification through the New York State Climate Smart Communities program. And last but not least, this is a group of Lake Placid students who have been running their own composting business all throughout the pandemic.
All right, and speaking of the pandemic, their virtual summits have also been happening over the past year. So the whole Youth Climate Summit Network has been working hard to adapt the summit to a virtual experience. And fortunately, most of the core values and themes that we've talked about remain the same. And there are, some opportunities to access speakers that you might not be able to access for an in-person summit, or maybe reach a wider audience that you'd be able to reach for an in-person summit. And so these are just a few resources that have helped us on our way in thinking about virtual summits. The organization Training for Change has been really instrumental in helping us master tech logistics and think creatively about virtual programming. So highly recommend them. And we've compiled everything that we've learned, that the Summit Network as a whole has learned, into a virtual toolkit that really talks more specifically about how to adapt all this to a virtual summit. So that's a free resource as well that's available. And last, again, we might sound like a broken record like this, but it's honestly true. Talking to young people, particularly for virtual summits, is key, especially right now when a lot of students are really feeling the digital burnout, and just making sure that if you're going to host a virtual summit, you're doing it with them and making sure that it's something that they're excited about, and getting their advice and input on platforms and speakers and all of that is just as important here as anywhere else. So a couple virtual summits that have happened this past year. The Bronx Youth Climate Summit was the very first summit that switched to virtual about a year ago, totally planned by high school students. So no surprise that some of the most successful virtual summits have been led completely by high school students. There's a group of students from the California Bay Area that went to the Bronx Youth Climate Summit, and then they got really inspired and they ended up hosting their own Bay Area Youth Climate Summit, a virtual summit this past fall that was attended by over 280 young people. So there's just some examples of students really using the virtual space to accomplish some cool stuff. And just a couple facilitation tips. There's a lot more of this in our resources, but just a few that have been really key for us is first, just you have to do less at a virtual summit because days are just shorter. People can't really manage long days of screen time that well. So you kind of have to narrow in on those things that are really key and central and really work well in a virtual space, and focus on those and let go of some of the other stuff that you might be able to do at an in-person summit. Similarly, managing energy, so thinking about length and how you're offering breaks from screen time and how you're mixing up presenters and ways that people engage, another really key element. And last, just adjusting expectations. We've really found this year that engagement from high school students does not always look like them talking with their camera off on Zoom. But we also keep in mind that any student that's logging in to attend a virtual Youth Climate Summit on their free time when they're also doing Zoom school, like they really care about it just by logging in and just by being there. So just keeping in mind that even if your numbers, your attendance look different than usual, every student that logs in really cares about it, and you're keeping them engaged and giving them a way to stay connected during what is a really tough time for everyone. So just kind of adjusting those expectations when you're thinking about the virtual summit. Whew. Okay, so we just talked quite a lot. I'm hoping that you all have a lot of summit or questions. Whew, I almost said summits. So please feel free, if you have questions at this time, to pop them in the Q&A. And I also wanted to invite Elise and Erin on just for a couple minutes so we can answer some questions too. I saw one question come up in the chat from Josh about providing examples of summits in urban, lower income areas that have been planned by BIPOC students and organizations, which is a great question. Thanks for answering it or asking it. I can give one example, and then I just invite anyone else to chime in too. I know there's one summit we've worked closely with over the past few years in Brooklyn, in East Flatbush, Brooklyn, which is run by the Kurt Hahn Expeditionary Learning School. I'm sorry, my cat is also excited about youth climate summits. And so the school that hosted that youth climate summit was, almost all BIPOC students. Many of them were coming from first generation American families. Many were English as a second language learners. And their summit, I'm trying to think of a few of the things that were critical for their summit. All of their speakers focused on equity and justice issues. A lot of the topics were about things like air pollution or safety when kids are biking to school. I had a fifth grader explain to me very explicitly the connection between police brutality and responding to climate change. So almost all of their workshops and all of their speakers were speakers that those students could relate to and had similar lived experiences and were very localized. Like almost all the speakers were from Brooklyn and were working not far from the neighborhoods where those kids were living. And that, again, it was a one-day summit. It was held in their school. And that having it in their school made it, I think, more accessible to other students. It also kept costs lower. So just a couple points of that summit. And I don't know if anyone else has examples that they want to share with that. No pressure if you don't want to.
I can speak for,
Go for
the Youth Environmental Action Summit. And I was going to share this as one of my tips in a couple of minutes, but we'll just take it now. One of the things that we do is we try to plug into like existing efforts. So like we work with youth and family services or empowerment programs or boys and girls clubs, like groups that are already convening youth that are maybe like in those specific areas that we're looking to support. And one of the things that I think is really important is that I feel is that, Youth Climate Summit should be accessible to everyone. And so, even if you don't identify as an environmental advocate or like see yourself in that space, being involved in a summit like this, especially, with a focus on social justice as, very much connected to environmental justice just makes a lot of sense. And so we've seen just like those partnerships being really critical to like bringing people in and getting them involved in kind of some of the work. So that's the way that we've been thinking about it.
Thanks, Elise. I saw a couple questions also come in about keeping the momentum going after the summit. So, they make these climate action plans at the summit, they get all excited, and then you go back home or you go back to your school. And how do you keep that momentum going and keep that follow through on those climate action plans going? So I'll just open that up to all of you if anyone wants to chime in.
I feel like, I guess I'm still speaking from the Wild Center's perspective, but one of our most important things we do is to just keep existing relationships with the students. So, you know, a lot of them will go back to their schools and they'll be organized with their green team. So staying in touch with those green teams, maybe having like monthly check-ins, sort of making sure that you are always available for them in whatever capacity you can be, so that they know that they always have like support and can come to you and they can bounce ideas off of you. So I guess keeping the relationship going is super important to sustain change.
Thanks, Hannah. And Erin, I know you actually your team was really successful implementing some projects after the summit. So what were some things that helped your team really make progress with your climate action plans?
Yeah, so I was just gonna say like kind of what Hannah was saying of like check-ins. Like what we did is that at the end of our last workshop, we sent out a Google form just so the students could put like their names, emails, name of the club, also a faculty email in case our emails got blocked out. Because sometimes there's certain algorithms in high schools where like emails don't go through. Like I know with my school email, a lot of mine get filtered out. Same with high school. So we had a Google form sent out so they could just give a very broad overview of what they are thinking of doing. And then we also had a section of like how we could support them. And we really emphasized that of like giving out our contact information, and our workshop presenters were also college students too, just because we felt that youth to youth connection was super impactful and kind of broke the ice in that way. So we sent out contact information of our presenters in case they wanted to reach out to them or myself, or yeah, just any other information that they may need. We had a little section in there just saying like, what can we do to help them? And we've been able to keep in contact with their youth leaders as well as their faculty to find out all like the great news. But I think it's really important just to emphasize that we are here to help them, and that it can be kind of intimidating reaching out and emailing, especially coming from a high school student. Like I know when I was in high school, I was very scared to reach out to anyone who wasn't my age, but just emphasizing that like we are all here to support each other and that they can reach out in any way possible.
Awesome, thank you. I still see there's some more questions out there, and please keep them coming in. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Elise to share about the summit that she works with, and we'll have also time after Elise is done to get to some more of your questions.
Thanks, Erin. So yeah, thanks again for inviting me here. My name's Elise Trelligan, and I'm going to be talking about the Youth Environmental Action Summit, which is very much based on the Wild Center's Youth Climate Summit model. We've been around for almost 4 years now, and we just hosted our 3rd summit at the end of March. So our first 2 were in person, and then this last one, we were challenged to go virtual. And we've learned a lot over the kind of few years that we've been doing this. And I wanted to share a couple of quick tips. I think I can fit 10 into the 7 minutes that I have. Some of them are really kind of conceptual and actually maybe hark back to some of what you heard Erin and Hannah speak to earlier, and Erin actually. And then a few are more like, you know, planning tips or really practical that you might think about as you're implementing both in-person and virtual summits. So Erin, we can go to the first one. And so these are kind of some of the planning tips here that we have. First of all, of course, it cannot be understated, or cannot be overstated rather, the meaningful involvement of students in the planning of the summit. I'll say that this has been a journey for our planning team. And so our first year, we had just 2 students that were involved in a mostly adult planning team. And we had to do a lot to actually educate the adults on the team to help them to interact with and support young people's ideas, and how to give like constructive feedback, all that sort of stuff. And that's really the responsibility of like whoever's kind of convening those meetings to provide that professional development or that kind of capacity for adults. And we can't make assumptions that they necessarily are kind of ready for that or have it. So that's something that's super important. Now, you know, we started with 2 students. Now we have about 24 students that work with us to plan, design, implement everything, the event. But it is important to set really clear expectations for like where you want students to be involved. And hopefully that's everywhere, but also like how to support them along the way. So it's not enough to just say, hey, we're going to host a summit, like get involved with us. You have to be able to really like provide some of that scaffolding. I'll also say that, this year we're really excited to be able to compensate some of our students to be able to be involved in the planning process. And that looks different. I can talk about that at another time if anybody's interested. But we were hearing from students that some people had to choose between, working a service industry job or being really involved in this. And so we, actively sought grant funds to be able to support that, at least as a pilot, and then we'll see where that goes from there. But I think it's really important to be able to make sure that these opportunities are available to all. My second tip is around professional development. This is something that's been really important for our model. We provide professional development on an annual basis for mentors or like the educators, teachers, or community leaders that are supporting young people in this work. So two areas that we really focus on are how to support youth voice, like what are those actual like instructional strategies and techniques and activities to use in the classroom or outside of the classroom to be able to kind of elicit and harness young people's ideas. And then second was an increased focus on hyperlocal issues. So a lot of our teachers and educators are like, Chesapeake Bay issues, we got it. But they weren't really super knowledgeable about what's happening in our neighborhoods, school communities, and just generally in kind of our really local area. And so we needed to provide some scaffolding around that and connect them with local leaders and different organizations to be able to better support them in connecting students to different resources and partners. Now we're hearing more teachers talking about how they're just like shifting all of their practice around teaching in particular, and they're really excited about it. And I should also note that students actually participate in delivering that professional development too. So we're flipping that power dynamic from the very beginning, and they're talking about what works for them when they're sitting in the seats of a classroom. The third tip is, I kind of mentioned this already, but leaning on a diversity of partners in order to bring a diversity of students to the table or to the summit, really. There are students that are already amped about environmental issues that are part of the green teams and things like that, but we work with other groups that are just interested in kind of more of a project-based sort of activity. And from there, the relationships develop and they become more interested in this sort of thing. So that's something, partners, they can't be understated in any of this as well. Those are kind of the three big tips. So partners, professional development, and then youth involvement. And then Erin, if you can go to the next slide for me, I'll give just some basic tips on actual implementation. So Erin already mentioned a little bit about like walking the talk. I'll also say in addition to that is just like elevating the experience. So you want the ambiance of your summit to be incredible. When students walk through the door, you want them to feel like they're somewhere special. And, this can be done through a variety of different means, music, art, just like, what you're serving, vegetarian meal and real plates and napkins. Like we saw that so many times come back, and our feedback was just like, I felt like I was at a real conference. And so really elevating that event. And then that just gets like that kind of, students get talking about it and they get excited about it and they go back and they tell their parents and then they're posting on social media. It's just kind of like this thing that really elevates the experience. Providing opportunities for action at the summit itself. This is something that we've been exploring more and more over the course of a few years, but we hear it in feedback all the time that students want to do something while they're actually at the summit to make change. So we've worked with folks like Citizens Climate Lobby to do some advocacy work at the summit. This year we were virtual, but we were able to host some pre and post community action days around our community gardens and in our city parks. So there are things like that that you can do that also inspire people who maybe are struggling with that kind of project idea, but they can also enter at this point of like doing some sort of collective action. You also might want to consider providing opportunities to interface with local community leaders. So I think it's really important for young people to interface with folks who hold power and to kind of, challenge it, but also share ideas. So if students are presenting on action project ideas or brainstorming, maybe you can invite different local leaders to hear about those and find ways to kind of plug into existing efforts. After the summit, it's super important that rest is part of this process, and so giving both yourself and the students that you work with and your other partners time to rest and reflect, and then come back and share, but also to celebrate. And in that, I'll say that we just finished our summit a couple of weeks ago, and we were like, oh, time to relax finally. But those legacy documents that you put together after the summit are so clutch. So go back and make sure that you're kind of documenting your timeline, your Gantt charts, all that sort of stuff is going to help you so much when you go back and start planning for your next summit next year. So that's just a quick tip. And then my last couple tips really quick, Erin, on my last slide are around virtual. So all of these like extra things that add value, like music, we did a mindfulness meditation during lunch, those opportunities to engage students in action through the community action days, giving out watercolor kits so that students could make a Jill Pelto inspired watercolor at lunchtime, trivia, all that sort of stuff really builds up that kind of virtual ambiance. And it just like came through as some of the maybe pieces that folks remembered the most. Leaning on students to be energizers. This was like the #1 most important thing that we probably did this year during our virtual summit is we had our ambassadors, their #1 job for the day, but some of them were also speaking. So I shouldn't say their #1 job, but one of their jobs was being an energizer in all the breakout rooms. And essentially what that meant was, tell the audience what the Gantt chart is. Sorry, I'll get back to that. Essentially what that meant was that in each of the breakout rooms, they were in charge of setting the tone. So if folks weren't kind of like chatting or using Jamboards or verbally communicating, it was their responsibility to kind of like amp things up. And it really did set the tone. They also were kind of our lifeline. So we had our WhatsApp going. And, you know, at one point, when one of our ambassadors, Josie, was like, hey, our session is dead right now. Like the facilitator is not prepared. We need somebody to come in and triage. So we were able to send somebody over and kind of support. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but that's like the worst case scenario, but you have your student there that is able to like kind of maintain control and kind of communicate back to the home base. And then lastly, practice, practice, practice. The dry runs are no joke. It's important to do them. And that's how you can get to having, you know, a relatively smooth, there's always going to be hiccups virtual event. But it's really helpful, everything from, you know, spotlighting different speakers to transitions and slides to kind of handing things over. All those sorts of things come through in the practice round. So make sure that you do that if you're trying to go virtual. Those are my 10 tips, and I think I took 10 minutes. So I'm sorry, Erin, for going over.
Don't be sorry. That's amazing.
But I'm happy to connect with anybody after if folks have additional questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I saw there's a few questions that came in for you while you were talking. So, and the rest of our time really, we have time for a few more questions. And then I just have a couple follow-up things at the end. So it looks like one of the questions was, hold on. There's someone who asked about the watercolor idea, and then having maybe examples of that PD professional development you talked about, kind of on that, like helping the coaching adults to work with youth.
Yeah, I can just speak really quickly to the watercolor. So Jill Pelto is a young climate scientist and artist who's actually based in Maine presently, I believe. And we had her as one of our keynote speakers. And so she creates these beautiful watercolors using climate data. And so we had at our local museum, we had like watercolor kits that all students could go and pick up for free. And the lunchtime activity was essentially one of them was to like create your own Jill Pelto inspired watercolor and then post it on social media. I'll say that the social media piece didn't work perfectly because nobody's piece dried in time, but you know, that's okay. And then I can definitely share, if anybody wants to follow up on the professional development, we have a couple of different models that we've tried. One thing, you know, in the past couple of years, it's hard to get teachers to come out to PD. So we've done some different things like, you know, coffee-based coffee and pie. We've done some like happy hour related things and incorporating professional development kind of into those, but like finding like ways to like build community around food and drinks tends to be a good way to at least convene people. And I can share the actual resources that we use offline.
Excellent. Thank you. Let's see, I'm just looking at the other, it looks like there's a lot of folks just sharing a ton of resources in the chat. It looks like Mallory is hosting a Youth Climate Summit in the Canadian Rockies coming up mid-May. What are some tips you have to get us ready for it? Yeah, I feel like if you, I don't know, after all you've heard of all the tips that Elise gave, it would be great to hear maybe more what might help you at this stage in the game. Yeah, I don't know. Elise, is anything kind of, or Hannah, is anything coming to you off the top of your head, kind of like 2 weeks out from a summit, what you should be thinking about?
Virtual or in person?
I'm guessing virtual. It didn't say in the chat.
Virtual.
Virtual,
Yeah.
yes.
I mean, just like super clear communication with all of your presenters. Like I said, doing those kind of practice rounds, like we literally practice with every single one of our presenters, making sure that they were comfortable with the software or whatever it is that you're using. If it's Zoom, hopefully everybody's somewhat familiar with it now. And then I don't know how you're like working things out with students. Like we created, every single student received their own specific agenda this year. So because we were sending them specifically into different Zoom rooms and breakouts. And so like coordinating all those logistics and making sure everything is like 100% perfect is what we were doing when we were 2 weeks out.
Yeah, I think those kind of same for us. It's like you're in like tech logistic central. It's just double checking all that stuff, doing whatever dry runs you can, working out all those kinks ahead of time. Like I had like a row of sticky notes at the bottom of my monitor about things like remembering to record and just remembering all the settings that you have to make sure you click when you start the meeting, and having documents where you write down all those reminders to yourself is important. We also split up the roles for everything for each of our sessions, even if it seems little. But like having another person be responsible for like looking at the chat or dealing with the live stream, or, you know, if you're live streaming to Facebook or somewhere, YouTube, to have someone looking at the comments on that platform. Just all those little things, they seem like small, but when one person has to think about all those things, it can kind of make your head explode. And also just having someone as like tech backup, who maybe doesn't have a specific role, but is just there in case anything goes crazy. We'll just do.
Oh,
go
Erin,
ahead,
too.
Hannah.
I just feel like on the other side of things, like it's super important to like make sure to like have a bunch of hype on like social media. So if you have like sponsors or partners, like having them sharing summit things in the 2 weeks beforehand, having your student ambassadors sharing on their social media is just sort of like getting that hype up for student attendees, making sure people remember it and put it on their calendars.
And I hope your summit goes great. It's really exciting. You'll have to tell us more about it so we can hear how it went. We're coming up on time. So I know there's a couple other questions. I want to just make sure I finish with a couple follow-up slides so everyone knows how to stay connected and stay in the loop. First of all, is you all are invited to our monthly Summit Network meeting. So they always happen on the first Tuesday of the month from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern time. They're literally open to anyone, students, adults, teachers, whoever. You can have planned 10 summits or you can be learning about it for the first time. They're very collaborative. We do a lot of brainstorming, a lot of just group troubleshooting around issues having to do with summits. So definitely encourage everyone to come tune in if you want to stay connected with this group. The best way to connect with those is to join the Youth Climate Summit email listserv. That's the first place where the announcements for those meetings go out. There's that link you'll see in the chat. And then you can sign up for that listserv. You'll get the invitations to those meetings. So we hope to see all of you there. They usually have a pretty good time. And then another opportunity I wanted to share too is coming up this summer is the Summer Institute for Climate Change Education, which is a virtual institute. It's open to any educators all across the United States and in Canada as well. And all the educators and teachers will be grouped into geographic cohorts. So even though it's virtual, you'll have the opportunity to connect with other teachers and educators in your region. And a lot of the stuff we've talked about today, being focused on solutions and elevating youth voice and focusing on actions, a lot of the same stuff you're going to see show up in this institute as well. So that is about all we had for you today. And this is just a couple other ways to stay in touch. And I know Elise put her email in the chat too. So we hope you stay connected with us, and we hope that you tell us all about the summits and the amazing stuff that you're working on. I wanted to give a shout out to Hannah, who's graduating in a couple weeks and jumped on to do this presentation pretty last minute. So Thanks to Hannah and also to Erin for joining. Both of them, are college students right about in finals time. So it's no small thing that they were there. So thank you to them. And thank you to Elise too, for sharing all of your tips and just always inspiring us with the work that you're doing at your summit. So I think that's about it. Thank you so much for tuning in, everyone. I hope you found it useful, and we will be sending out a recording and a link to all these resources in the next couple days. So if there's anything you missed today, you'll have that in your email pretty soon. So thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for coming, and have a great rest of your week. Just gonna let everybody just kind of finish conversations in the chat. Looks like there's still some stuff going on, but do not hang out if you don't want to. Thanks, everybody.